Hi, I'm Steve Spinner, President and CEO of UNFI. Thanks for joining me today. You know, we talk a lot about financial results, growing our market share, being operationally excellent, becoming one company, and making a major contribution towards sustainability and philanthropy. But one of the other things that's extremely important to us is providing a safe work environment, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I encourage you to take this video extremely seriously. It's important to all of us. Thanks again for joining us today.
Hi, I'm Tom Zicki, and I'm the company's Chief Human Resource and Sustainability Officer.
I'm Tom Gurlea, Divisional President of UNFI. Tom and I are here today to share 3 videos with you in regards to workplace violence.
Right. So the first one's called Flashpoint, and Flashpoint's really all about understanding what workplace violence is, how it affects you, how it affects your colleagues, how it affects the company as a whole.
Workplace violence needs to be identified, and these type of videos are going to give you the tools to identify any type of workplace violence.
And it's not only identify, but you're going to need to take action too. And so these videos are going to help you understand what the steps are in the event that you see something so that we can make sure to prevent escalation of violence.
UNFI is thrilled to show you these videos as we want to make sure your work environment is as safe as possible.
And it's a great place to work. We love our company. Let's make sure we keep workplace violence out of UNFI.
Flashpoint, the point when a fire ignites. It happens when you have the right combination of fuel, heat, and oxygen. It's a point of no return. I'm Randy Spivey.
And I'm Jim Sporleader, both from the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. From a match to a flamethrower, we all know the things that can generate a flashpoint and trigger a fire.
But oxygen is invisible. You can't see it, and you can't smell it. With too much oxygen in a room, though, even a small spark can create a devastating flashpoint. Here at the Center for Personal Protection and Safety, we help individuals and organizations create a safe environment wherever they are, whether it's in the workplace or when they travel abroad. This program is focused on an issue that affects all of us: how to prevent violence in the workplace. In it, we'll provide you with an understanding of what workplace violence is, common myths surrounding the issue of workplace violence, warning signs of potential violence before it occurs, and we'll give you options on how to respond.
So what is workplace violence? A common myth is that workplace violence only involves murder or physical assault. But in truth, it covers a whole range of disruptive behaviors that include threats, harassment, intimidation, bullying, stalking, domestic violence that enters the workplace, and many others. Workplace violence is any action that threatens the safety of an employee, impacts an employee's physical and/or psychological well-being, or causes damage to an organization's property.
When catastrophic violence explodes on the job, it often turns out that the workplace was like a room full of flammable gas that no one realized was there. One of the biggest myths of workplace violence is that events happen out of the blue, or that someone just snapped.
What we know is that violence is evolutionary. It builds up over time and is often preceded by behaviors which might suggest the propensity for future violence.
And let's dispel what is in some ways the most dangerous myth about workplace violence. The myth that workplace violence is rare, that it can't happen here, or that it couldn't happen to you. Actually, there are more than 2 million reported acts of violence per year in America's workplaces at a staggering cost of $36 billion per year. And these are the numbers of incidents that we know about. In fact, many incidents that don't involve physical violence go unreported. This includes disruptive behaviors at the lower end of what's known as the workplace violence spectrum.
So the true cost is much higher. And it's not only measured in dollars and lost productivity, there's a significant human cost as well. That's why making the effort to prevent workplace violence is such a win-win. You may never know if you actually succeed in preventing a violent incident, but if you can help create a more positive and respectful work environment, it's hardly a waste of time.
One of the other myths that we see in workplace violence is that these events will resolve themselves, that if they're not intervened with or not interfered with, it'll just disappear or go away over time. We know for a fact that's not the case. Early intervention is the key to preventing workplace violence.
Preventing a violent incident. That goal puts to rest a final and persistent myth about workplace violence, the idea that you can't do much to prevent it.
The part that is truly a myth is employees adopting the feeling that no matter what they do, they can't have an impact on the problem, and that's just not true.
In fact, you can do something about many situations that could eventually lead to violence. You can make a difference in keeping your workplace safe. So let's start with a formula that will help you do just that. Awareness plus action equals prevention. Of course, the action has to be appropriate and effective, but without awareness and the willingness to act, you truly become vulnerable.
The beginning of awareness is understanding the spectrum of workplace violence. On the extreme right is death, and there's nothing ambiguous about that. If shots are fired, if someone begins shooting people in a workplace, there are some things you can do to increase your chances of surviving. But the reality is you're reacting, not preventing. At the next level down the spectrum are behaviors that clearly represent physical violence. But once again, if this occurs, the focus is on reacting rather than preventing.
As we move to the left, we see a transition from physical violence to psychological and emotional violence. In this part of the spectrum are behaviors like intimidation, stalking, bullying, making threats, both direct and implied. These behaviors don't amount to physical violence, but they are destructive to the workplace.
At the far left of the spectrum are what experts call behaviors of concern. This is a gray area, the place we'll spend most of our time in this program. The main purpose of this training is to raise your awareness about these behaviors of concern. We want to give you a sharper lens to look through as you go through your workday. We want to help you recognize when a low-threat behavior may be escalating toward possible violence.
The path toward violence is almost always an evolutionary one with signposts along the way. We want you to be able to recognize what are sometimes subtle but important indicators that point to the possibility that violence could be brewing in your workplace.
It's important to be aware that there's no profile of a workplace violence offender. The fact is, you just can't predict with certainty who might become violent, which is why recognizing and responding to behaviors of concern is so important.
So what are behaviors of concern, and what are some examples? Behaviors of concern are disruptive, aggressive, hostile, or emotionally abusive behaviors that generate anxiety or create a climate of distrust, and that adversely affect productivity and morale. And while these behaviors may or may not escalate into more severe behavior, they are harmful in and of themselves and warrant attention and possible intervention.
Behaviors of concern run a spectrum. Any of us, at one time or another, can be overwhelmed with life. And when we're feeling that way, our coping skills are diminished. And that's when others will see a change in our behavior.
Some examples of behaviors of concern include, but are not limited to, prolonged anger, holding grudges, hypersensitivity to criticism, blaming others, collecting injustices, preoccupation with violent themes, obsessions, extreme anxiety, and extreme sadness.
If there's behavior that makes you uncomfortable, sometimes you can't really put your finger on why it's making you uncomfortable, but you have a feeling, and you should always follow that feeling. Many people call it intuition.
There may be an innocent explanation for a behavior of concern you might have observed in your workplace.
Morning, Sarah.
After all, we've all had bad days when we've snapped at someone, or have been angry, or sad, or out of sorts. However, there are behaviors and patterns of behavior that suggest the potential for future violence. And while behaviors of concern don't guarantee that violence will occur, the fact is, when violence does occur, behaviors of concern are almost always present.
You know, I'm sick of the treatment I get around here.
Some behaviors of concern might not look like they could lead to a flashpoint. Take sadness, for example. Like anger, it's one we all know. We've all been sad ourselves, but we all recognize that if sadness continues over an extended period of time, it probably needs more attention, if only to help someone in need. But you should also know that what begins as sadness may evolve into a serious depression and the potential for suicide. A person in this desperate emotional state may pose a threat to himself and others in the workplace.
An individual who is contemplating suicide may not be just thinking about taking his own life, but may also decide to take the lives of others in the workplace.
Change is another important aspect related to behaviors of concern. Sometimes there's a stereotype associated with a workplace violence offender, that he or she was a loner, But some people are just quiet by nature and may enjoy solitude. If someone changes, though, if someone who is usually friendly and outgoing suddenly becomes quiet and disengaged, that change is a behavior of concern. Remember, you're not trying to decide when something has become dangerous. By then, it may be too late. Your responsibility is to recognize and respond to behaviors that, left unchecked, might lead to violence.
Often, there's a triggering event that causes a violent flashpoint in someone in the workplace. It might be something significant to that individual, like a reprimand, termination, or layoff. Or it could be something that happened at home, like financial troubles, a separation, divorce, or a death.
Why are you throwing me under the bus? I've always been there for you. I've been the one who's put the most into this.
Throughout my career, I've noted that those that engage in violent behavior, many times they're doing so as the result of a loss, whether real or perceived, in their personal or professional life. This is what triggers a crisis for an individual. And when people go into that type of crisis mode, it affects the way they think, it affects the way they feel, and lastly, what we need to be sensitive to, it affects the way they behave.
On the other hand, it might be a series of imagined slights to someone who is overreacting and blowing a situation out of proportion.
Those who blame others for everything. People that have a short fuse. They're very intolerant to frustration. They are suspicious of others.
We see individuals that we would term injustice collectors. They perceive every slight as something that they should take action upon. They're constantly hypersensitive to criticism. These are just some of the things that we've seen in dealing with some of these individuals that ultimately did act out violently. But many of these behaviors manifest themselves much earlier in the spectrum.
There are a couple of issues you might not have thought about as related to workplace violence, or that could spill over from someone's personal life into the professional life: stalking and domestic violence. We've all read about high-profile stalking situations, individuals who harass, follow, and threaten celebrities or other public figures. Stalking, however, occurs most commonly in the context of a relationship involving intimate partner violence. And stalking can also occur between strangers and just acquaintances.
Someone who's being stalked might receive unwanted attention, contact, or gifts. But where does it cross the line from a misguided and inappropriate sense of friendliness to clearly recognizable stalking? If you're the one receiving the attention, that's something you'll have to decide for yourself. Remember, though, people who stalk others sometimes become violent toward them when their attention or actions are rejected or not returned in kind.
Since stalking and domestic violence often go hand in hand, what is domestic violence and what does it look like? Domestic violence is defined as a pattern of behavior in which one intimate partner uses physical violence, intimidation, threats, emotional, sexual, or economic abuse to control the other partner in a relationship. It's a significant problem in today's workplace, affecting nearly 1 out of every 4 women.
Employees can often observe behaviors which might suggest that someone is the victim of violence at home. These behaviors include disruptive phone calls and emails at work, discomfort when communicating with others, anxiety and lack of concentration on the job, unexplained bruises or injuries, inappropriate clothing for the time of year, frequent work absences, unplanned use of leave time, and disruptive visits to the workplace from a current or former intimate partner. Because domestic violence often spills over into the workplace, you should report signs of domestic violence just as you would other behaviors of concern.
There are 2 critical points that can be placed on the workplace violence spectrum: a flashpoint and an action point. The flashpoint is the place on the spectrum where actual violence occurs. The action point is the place where you recognize that violence may be an outcome and you respond with some type of action. It's important to keep in mind that the exact location of a flashpoint can vary from one situation and individual to another.
Here's why it's so important to set an early action point. The fact is, we just don't know what's going on inside another person's head, the thoughts they're having, the emotions they're feeling. We also might not know what's going on in their personal lives or the number of stressors they may be experiencing. When a violent incident happens, the people who are called in to investigate don't have to wonder about any of those things. They know there was a flashpoint. They can look back from the moment it happened and usually see points along the way where intervention might have prevented the violence. They look for the earliest signs, the first behaviors of concern.
Hindsight's always 20/20 when you look at these cases and you do the post-mortem on a workplace violence incident, that there were opportunities to intervene at a very early stage because these behaviors were there.
When you don't know what the outcome will be, the signs can be harder to read. Sometimes it's unclear if you're watching a slow build-up to violence or just a bump in the road. And it's hard to know if someone's poor coping skills or an extremely stressful situation in their lives could lead them to immediately go from a behavior of concern to a violent event. So when in doubt, take action. You may be asking yourself, well, what if I'm wrong and the behavior I'm seeing won't lead to a flashpoint? Well, let's consider that for a moment. If you're mistaken, a fellow employee who may be going through a very difficult time may get some much needed help and appreciated assistance. There's no downside to that outcome.
Hey, Amy?
Yes.
Can we talk to you about something?
Sure.
There's an issue with Darren.
He's been acting a little strange lately, and he kind of just made a bit of a ruckus out in the office.
He seems really upset, and it's not the first time it's happened.
We have to take all these behaviors or threats seriously. I think we have to move away from, I don't want to get John in trouble, I don't want to cause him to even get fired. That's a very real fear. I think we have to become more empowered to overcome that, because what you do here can prevent a future violent incident.
Now that you know what behaviors of concern are, and that setting an early action point is so important, let's take a closer look at what options you have in responding to behaviors of concern. Essentially, you have three possibilities: note it and remember it, talk about it to the person of concern, or report it to the appropriate person or office. Let's look at how you might respond to a common behavior of concern, like an outburst of anger. It might just be someone having a really bad day and acting out in a way that's out of character. In that case, the right response might be to just note it and remember it. But if that kind of behavior continues, or if it seems to be escalating, you need to recognize it might lead to a flashpoint in the future and take some kind of action.
For many lower-level behaviors of concern, you might feel comfortable just asking the person if everything's okay. The fact is, the path to violence often begins with someone experiencing a loss in his or her personal or professional life.
I'm gonna go talk to Darren.
In situations like that, just giving someone the chance to talk, to vent about what's troubling them, can be a powerful stress reliever.
Hey, Darren. Are you okay?
I'm just a little upset.
Do you want to talk about it?
Sure.
If you're making these observations, they're sending out duress signals. It's like a personal SOS. And if you're tuned into your environment, you're picking up on that. And so sitting with them and giving them an opportunity to tell you about that is an incredible contribution to your work environment.
If you've asked a coworker how they're doing and their answer concerns you, you should take the next level of action and report it to an appropriate person in your organization.
What's going on?
Everybody else gets credit for my work. She's gonna pay for this. You're all gonna pay for this.
Let's take a different view of anger as a behavior of concern. In its extreme form, aggressively angry behaviors are harmful. For that reason alone, they require timely attention and effective intervention. The same is true for physical violence, as well as all threats and threatening behavior. All of these behaviors must be taken seriously and must be brought to the attention of the appropriate person or department. For these behaviors, the only effective response is to report them immediately.
I'm calling because there was something that happened in my office today that made me kind of uncomfortable.
There are many ways to report when you've decided you've reached an action point. Beyond some of the confidential systems companies have put into place, there's also your supervisor, or someone from human resources, security, employee assistance, or perhaps a union representative.
Many companies have 24/7 tip lines where whoever calls in can maintain their anonymity.
Other ways to do this would be through the use of maybe emails, text messaging, or any other electronic means as a way to communicate what the issues might be.
And sometimes there's strength in numbers. Maybe you need some help. Maybe you want to team up with another employee who has also maybe observed some behavior that concerns them.
Why is it that when violence erupts in a workplace, investigators often learn in the aftermath that people knew the situation was dangerous, but no one took action? It's because there are roadblocks to taking action. Actually, the first roadblock is simply lack of awareness. People who've not been trained to recognize behaviors of concern will not have the awareness needed to respond. And there are psychological barriers too. Some people worry about being seen as a busybody or a snitch. They may be concerned about something, but they want to be sure a situation is really dangerous before taking action.
Sometimes people hesitate to report something because they're worried about retaliation. That's why confidential reporting systems can be so valuable. And sometimes people fail to take action because they think it's someone else's responsibility. It's not. It's your responsibility. Your personal safety is at stake. If a flashpoint is triggered in your workplace, it will affect you in some way.
In my experience in working these types of cases and lecturing all over the country and dealing with these issues, one of the issues that always strikes me is how many times people have observed behaviors after the fact, once they've thought about it, after an incident's occurred, that had they done something early, they could have prevented this incident from happening.
People are the backbone of a workplace violence prevention program. If you sense something, say something.
Work from a mindset of awareness. Be aware of the people around you so you can recognize behaviors of concern. Be prepared and committed to take action when action is required. Don't talk yourself out of doing what you need to do. The stakes are too high.
These behaviors, if left unchecked, will not go away, and in many cases can escalate into more violent behavior.
There's probably no greater contribution you can make to the safety of your workplace than responding in a timely and effective manner to behaviors of concern. The point of this training is to make you mindful, not fearful or suspicious.
Hey, Amy. Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?
Awareness plus action equals prevention. You can make a difference.
Let's take a few moments to focus on some key points from the Flashpoint video. You know quite a bit about workplace violence. Workplace violence can cause personal injury and damage to property. It includes behavior that can impede the normal course of work and can cause workers, managers, and customers to fear for their safety. There are several behaviors of concern that you should be on the lookout for as indicators of workplace violence. Causing property damage, swearing or being insubordinate are behaviors of concern. Likewise, when a person holds grudges, is fascinated with violence, exhibits aggressive outbursts, displays a temper, or shows sadness, these are also behaviors of concern. Workplace violence can be of a psychological and emotional nature. Threats, harassment, stalking, and bullying are all types of workplace violence. And probably the most obvious example of workplace violence is injury or death. Awareness is key. You need to be aware of what is going on around you. Tune in and look for those behaviors and signs, and then act. Awareness and action is how workplace violence can be prevented. UNFI has a workplace violence policy. The use of violence or threats of violence is not tolerated. The use of verbal or written threats, harassing, demeaning, bullying, or threatening behavior, or engaging in violent acts will result in that person being removed from UNFI property and appropriate action being taken. It may also include a written disciplinary action, training sessions, referrals to counseling, suspension, termination, and/or reporting to appropriate law enforcement authorities or agencies. All associates must be alert to the workplace violence or the potential for it and notify the appropriate management personnel or HR. If you feel you have been subjected to workplace violence or have identified a situation where workplace violence has or is likely to occur, you should bring it to your immediate attention of your respective manager, supervisor, or HR representative. UNFI also recognizes that domestic abuse usually affects a person's work life and performance at work. UNFI supports victims and survivors of domestic violence and will work with them to help find resources for support. HR should be notified of any active restraining orders or no contact orders. UNFI offers an employee assistance program for employees who wish to get help. You can contact HR for additional information. If you experience or see workplace violence or behaviors of concern, we urge you to report them to your supervisor or manager, your facility manager, or HR. The ethics hotline is also available at 1-888-456-UNFI. Please remember, if a behavior makes you uncomfortable, listen to your instincts and report it.
Lynn, did you know that 1 in every 4 women will be the victim of domestic violence in their lifetime?
That's astonishing.
It really is. It is a big number, and that translates into workplace violence. And $3 to $4 billion a year are estimated to be lost, whether through people out of time or lost wages or lost productivity.
The number really is astonishing, and it's unacceptable.
Yep.
Hello, I'm Lynn Brennigan, VP of National HR for UNFI, and this is...
I am Chris Testa, Division President for Woodstock Farmers Manufacturing and Blue Marble. Lynn and I are here today to introduce the second video you'll see today, which is called Silent Storm. And Silent Storm touches on the effects of domestic abuse and how that affects the workplace.
Right. So in this video, you are going to recognize the signs of an abusive relationship. The reason that's so important is that when an associate is in an abusive relationship, the most likely place for that to turn into a violent situation is in the workplace at the time when the individual who's in the relationship is choosing to leave the relationship. The reason for that is because the person's time is predictable. And so the abuser will come to the workplace and it can become a very unsafe situation for everybody concerned.
Yeah. And Lynn and I aren't here just to simply introduce the video, but we're also to let you know that UNFI supports its victims of domestic violence. We can help. There's resources here that you may or may not even be aware of. And one of the key takeaways that Lynn and I want you to have today, and UNFI wants you to have, is speak to your manager, speak to a human resource department, find out what's out there that can help you if you are a victim of domestic violence.
Yes, UNFI is here to support you. And if you have a colleague and you're concerned, we are here to provide support. You may not be aware of that because we work really hard at protecting the privacy of anybody that's in that kind of situation. Let me give you an example. Recently, one of our associates, a woman, was the victim of an abusive relationship and was attempting to leave the relationship and had a restraining order against her husband. And we made sure that we did everything possible to make her work seem, her schedule, not predictable. We allowed her to work on different shifts, and we made sure that when she left the building that she was always accompanied. There are lots of things we can do. We're very interested in making sure that our associates are protected and also that her co-workers and everybody in the work area are also protected. So please come to HR, come to your manager, help us help.
Yeah, it's not a topic that's talked a lot about, but it's a very real problem, and we're not immune to it here at UNFI, as given by your example, and I'm sure, unfortunately, there's others.
Yeah.
So we encourage you to watch the video and learn from it. Learn what you can do to help. It could save you, it could save a coworker, it could literally save a life.
We have the opportunity to get in front of their executive team overseas. Finally, can you believe believe it? After 6 months. So, we have a chance to get in front of their executives overseas.
What's that mean?
Just means that I will be gone for 2 weeks.
No. It's not happening.
If I do not present this, we're gonna lose this account.
Who's we? Your team. Bunch of guys.
This is something I've been working on for a long time.
I told you I don't like that guy, Mike.
This is important.
I said you're not going! You're not going on that trip. You think you're a big shot now, huh? You think you're a big shot? You're nothing but a tramp to these people.
I have to go to work.
You're nothing but a tramp.
I have to go to work.
Terrific.
Terry, I'm in a meeting. I only have a minute.
We've all been taught that you don't bring your personal problems to work, but sometimes they show up anyway. I'm Randy Spivey.
And I'm Jim Sporleader, both from the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. Often referred to as domestic violence, intimate partner violence and its spillover effects are fast becoming a major issue of concern in our workplaces today.
When we say domestic violence is an epidemic, we're not exaggerating. It's everywhere. And for companies with the statistics, it is absolutely certain that any mid to large size company has employees dealing with domestic violence.
It's a very expensive proposition for companies all over the United States to the tune of $3 to $4 billion a year in lost wages, productivity, and time away from work.
In the best case, it's likely that intimate partner violence is already costing your organization in some way.
Where were we? We were with you.
But in the worst case, it could lead to a catastrophic event, one that might even cost lives. There are numerous myths about intimate partner violence. One of the most common is the myth that smart and successful people don't get entangled in abusive relationships.
You'll be in charge of the presentation, right?
There is absolutely no stereotype. There's no typical victim of domestic violence. When I was in law school and it was announced that I was getting my fellowship to do this work, I was approached by classmates of mine, law students, who were being abused by other law students, physically beaten up at night, and then getting up and going to school the next day with their abuser in the same classroom.
You know, as a former prosecutor, I've had victims that were surgeons, police officers, judges, and even fellow prosecutors. This abuse transcends all socioeconomic lines.
Myth number 2 is that intimate partner violence is not a workplace issue. Many people assume it's simply a private matter, that it only affects people in their lives at home.
You know, it's like two separate islands. Some people view it as, well, there's work and then there's personal life, and never the twain shall meet. But that's just not true.
After a while, they stop thinking about consequences for their behaviors, and they stop caring about what's right or what's wrong. So what if he shows up at my office and he's got a weapon with him? What if he thinks that I'm telling people that he's bad or whatever? So he gets scared, comes to my office with a weapon. That could happen.
We've all seen news reports of tragic incidents where an abuser actually went into a partner's workplace and began shooting. But executives, managers, and employees are now beginning to recognize that the spillover effects of intimate partner violence are often subtle and pervasive.
You stick to that schedule. It's lunch at noon, like you said.
So myth number 3 is that blatantly violent or life-threatening situations are the only kinds of scenarios that could impact your workplace.
Jill, our 2 o'clock, it's been bumped to 3.
In truth, the most toxic effects of intimate partner violence can be silent, almost invisible.
It absolutely affects the company at their productivity level. When a victim is preoccupied with all the abuse, she's obviously being distracted. She's being taken away from her work. She can't stay focused, so she's not being a productive employee.
not only do I know this impacts that individual's ability to do her job, but the people around her. It's the ripple effect. If that individual is in a pod or in a cubicle and the phone rings and people around her hear that, you don't think that's going to cause other people to stop working and talk about it and maybe IM and email each other? So now you've lost the productivity of not just that one individual. No one is an island in the workplace, right? But at least one other person.
Now that we've dealt with some of the most persistent myths, let's really define the problem we're talking about.
Regardless of the name you give it, or the people involved, the behavior is consistent. One member of the Corporate Alliance to End Partner Violence describes it this way: domestic violence, or intimate partner violence, is a pattern of coercive behavior that is used by one person in an intimate relationship to gain power and control over another.
It includes physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, and financial abuse. It occurs between people of all racial, economic, educational, and religious backgrounds, in heterosexual and same-sex relationships, living together or separately, married or unmarried, in short-term or long-term relationships. And stalking or other harassing behavior is often a key aspect of intimate partner violence.
I can see you right now. You're walking with that guy. You're going to lunch with him again. I told you I don't want you going to lunch with that guy. You are so dead when you get home. I can't believe you're doing this to me.
In many cases, people involved in intimate partner violence don't actually realize they're in an abusive relationship until they come face to face with questions like these.
Many don't realize that yes answers are signs that they're in an abusive relationship. It may be because they're unaware that at the heart of intimate partner violence is a manipulative pattern of power and control. But in the beginning of the relationship, it can often seem like the opposite of that.
It wasn't like he had abuser tattooed on his forehead, and it wasn't like I had victim tattooed on mine. And it wasn't like the first time that we started talking that red flags went up and that it was very discernible.
Intimate partner violence is about power and control, but in the early stages of an abusive relationship, the foundations of power and control may be built through flattery and subtle manipulation.
They're very charismatic. They form attachments very quickly. They're very charming. They'll be very attentive.
They're so much the person that you want them to be. They're so perfect, you know, they're Prince Charming, and there's so much of this large dynamic to what you really thought that you wanted in the first place. And they give you just enough of that to keep you going and to get you closer and to develop some type of rapport and trust.
But then the evidence of power shifts.
Who was that?
Where he starts isolating her from friends and family.
We're going over our schedule.
How many times I told you I don't want him calling you?
Maybe I don't want you to spend time with your girlfriends anymore. He doesn't like that anymore because now there's an investment in the relationship. She goes along with that.
Mom, I gotta go.
I just kept excusing them away and kept thinking, okay, well, if I just make a few changes in what I'm doing and what I'm saying, it's not that big of a deal. It'll make us closer. He's just a little protective. He must care about me.
And now he knows an awful lot about her. He knows bank account information. He knows Social Security numbers. And again, he uses that information to start controlling finances.
There you go.
This isn't enough.
Now he's almost in total control.
I have a lot to get.
There's no violence at this point, and there doesn't even have to be violence, but it can be very much more insidious, this psychological, this emotional abuse.
Want you home in an hour.
The experts who study intimate partner violence depict the overall patterns of abusive and violent behaviors on what is known as the power and control wheel. This diagram helps us understand the different means and mechanisms used by abusers to establish and maintain control over their intimate partners. It's important to realize that many of these strategies are non-physical, and many of them are not against the law. However, they're very powerful and destructive, and they're reinforced by the threat or actual use of physical and sexual violence. For many victims, when they first see the power and control wheel, It's the moment they realize what's really happening in their lives.
They knew something was terribly wrong, they just didn't have a name for it. Once they looked at the power and control wheel, once they actually physically looked at a piece of paper that outlined the signs of abuse, they say, this is exactly what's going on in my home.
We've so stigmatized the terminology domestic violence victim or intimate partner victim. People don't want to be that, right? So that's the other thing that's happening, is that you reason to yourself that maybe what's happening to you isn't perfect, but no relationship is, right?
It was a really strange dynamic, but at the time I wasn't seeing it.
We can all sit back and imagine a relationship that we've been in longer than we should have been, a job that we've been in longer than we should have been in, a friendship that we were in longer than we should have been in. Think for a moment in your own life about a relationship of some kind that you were in that you knew wasn't good for you.
In abusive relationships, there is often a pattern of violence and abuse. Even in healthy relationships, there are normal ups and downs. But in abusive relationships, the physical and emotional stakes are typically much higher.
You are not going to that conference.
You know I have to go.
When the offender believes that his ability to control the victim is diminishing,
that's final.
It creates this triggering mechanism where then he has to compensate for that. And so you get this overreaction, and many times this overreaction is a violent one.
I can't do this anymore.
Well, you shouldn't have done that. See, now look what you've done. You are nothing.
After a violent incident, the abuser may then work to rebuild the relationship by asking for forgiveness and promising it won't happen again.
Hey, ladies.
Hey, Terry. And then afterwards, he'd back off and he'd be Prince Charming and, I'm so sorry and I don't know how that happened and I care about you so much and I love you.
Some people call this the honeymoon phase. It's a time when things seem to be going just fine. And it's often a time when the person trying to leave the relationship either loses resolve or is persuaded to stay.
He'd come back to being that person that I thought I loved in the first place. And so I kept trying.
In this kind of cycle, there can be periods of time when things seem almost normal. But then tension begins to build.
You're late.
And sooner or later, there's another explosion of psychological or physical violence.
You're late.
It's important to understand, though, that not all abusive relationships follow this kind of recurring pattern or cycle. Some abusers seem to strike without warning, with no buildup of tension. And some abusers have no remorse for their behavior or actions. With these kinds of abusive profiles, there may not be a honeymoon phase.
While there may or may not be a predictable pattern of abusive behaviors in any given relationship, there is a predictable period when the danger of physical violence increases dramatically. That period is when the power and control dynamics are ultimately challenged and the victim decides to leave the abusive relationship. That doesn't mean physical violence will occur, but it's much more likely to happen at this time than at any other. And if it does, it's likely to be more severe, possibly lethal. This is also a time when the impact of intimate partner violence on the workplace can be much more than simply a loss in productivity.
If a victim moves away from the abuser, it's very likely the offender will stalk the victim in the workplace in some way.
It's the only place the perpetrator knows to find her now. So suddenly, all of that anger and lethality that is focused on her is now focused on one place, the workplace, where she goes to work every day.
We know this woman is in what we call the danger zone. We know this is a dangerous situation.
You think you can avoid me forever? As long as you avoid me, nobody's gonna want you. You leave me, I'll kill you.
These offenders get obsessed. It's an obsession, and sometimes they don't know when to stop.
He was the kind of person that would show up on premises, or he would sit in the parking lot and watch me. He'd show up out of the blue and come in the back door.
What is so devastatingly important to keep in mind is the act of leaving is the ultimate threat to that power.
We know what the statistics are, that in most of the domestic violence homicides, the victim had terminated the relationship.
Some studies tell us that it's 20 times more dangerous in that time frame when an individual decides to leave.
Tragically, in the U.S. alone, on average, 3 women are killed every day by their partners. This can happen even when the woman has been granted a restraining order or an order of protection. Think about that. Someone is considered dangerous enough to warrant court-ordered protection. The legal system believes the workplace is a likely location for a possible act of violence, but no one in the workplace is aware of this.
In this training, we're not trying to teach you to be a security expert or a social worker, but it is important to understand that you could be affected by a situation that comes into the workplace from someone else's personal life.
And now that you know more about what intimate partner violence is and how it can impact your workplace, it's important to be able to understand signs of problems that might be brewing and what to do to minimize the impact.
Either it wasn't very discernible, or people were afraid to ask. What if I said yes? What if I said, I'm being beat up at home and I'm really in a scary relationship and I don't know what to do?
One of the reasons the workplace has been uneasy about addressing this issue is that it falls outside the comfort zone for the victim, the coworker, or manager. But it should be clear that the solution is not to pretend that there isn't a problem. So what should you do? What can you do?
First, it's important to recognize the signs that a coworker or colleague may be in an abusive relationship. We talked about stalking, both physical and electronic. Those are red flags, signs that violence could be developing.
But some of the signs are more subtle.
Hey, what's up with the turtleneck? It's like 85 degrees out.
Someone wearing a turtleneck in summer may be trying to hide bruises. The same is true for other kinds of clothing that may seem out of season. If flowers or gifts are delivered to someone, and there's an unenthusiastic or nervous response to that, that can be a sign. And there are others. If you recognize some of these signs or behaviors, how should you respond?
Hey, can we talk?
Sure, come on in.
As we've said before, it's not your job to be a counselor or an expert in social services. But if you feel comfortable, you might approach the person in a caring way and give them an opportunity to talk and share their burden. If you decide to do that, keep in mind that the goal is simply to listen and offer support. It's not your responsibility to advise on how and what to do. Leave that for the experts.
Nobody can tell you when it's time. Only that person can decide on their own when they're ready. And many of us would love to come in there and grab them by the hand and say, okay, we're Superman and we're going to save the day and we're going to make things better. But it can't be that way. It needs to be when they're ready.
Though it's true you don't want to recommend specific actions or schedules, there are some positive and supportive things you can say.
By letting the person know that you're there for them, I'll help you any way I can. If you need information, I'll get information. If you need a safe place to go to, I'll help you with that. What I really needed and what I really wanted was just someone to come up to me and say, I worry about you sometimes. I worry that you're not safe. Is everything okay?
If you've recognized some signs of potential intimate partner violence, but you don't feel comfortable approaching the person directly, you should report it. You should share your concerns with your manager, supervisor, human resources, or security, and continue to pay attention. If you see more signs of potential abuse, be sure to report those as well.
It may help to go with someone to report a potential problem. It may be with a victim, a coworker, or a colleague who shares your concerns. Remember how quickly a personal problem can turn into a workplace problem. Your organization needs to be aware of anything that could pose a threat to its people.
Is there anything you want to talk about? Because if there is, I'm here to listen.
The other action step you can take is to refer. If your organization has its own resources for dealing with situations like this, you should follow their guidelines. In most cases, though, refer means to help the victim connect with outside agencies that have experience dealing with victims in abusive relationships.
Many communities, for example, have battered women's shelters with counselors on staff who are very trained in the dynamics of this, who can talk to an individual about how she's feeling, the conflict she may be having about staying in that relationship if there are children involved, the lethality, and helping her better figure out how to keep herself safe at work and at home.
These support groups can give valuable help with things victims may never have thought about before. Things like creating a personal safety plan for home, for work, and an emergency departure plan. A personal safety plan includes everything from having a bag packed and ready to go, to having a crisis code word to use with children, family, and friends. It's vital to have emergency plans.
This is not an area for amateur help, especially if the victim is getting ready to leave the abusive partner and enter the danger zone. By referring the victim to resources that already exist in the community, you can help someone transform from victim to survivor.
Recognize, respond, report, and refer. That's the complete process. Yet there's something else everyone can do to help create more success stories. We can all help to build an atmosphere of awareness and support in our workplaces.
Businesses are responding. They're creating an environment where people who have been victimized by this type of behavior can come forward and report that the company will stand by them, that they will do the right thing.
We want to be sure to share with her that we would like to escort her to and from her car. Secondly, that a dummy voicemail account to screen Terry's calls would be a very worthwhile consideration.
Intimate partner violence may begin in the home, but the impact often reaches deep into the workplace, your workplace. It's not just a personal problem.
Intimate partner violence is your business. It's everyone's business. We can all make a difference.
The women I have served want to work, need to work, and are bright, motivated individuals. Lawyers, doctors, ticket toll booth operators, you name it. And they too want to be able to work and to do their jobs and be productive. And many of them have been and will be again with the proper supports.
You have just learned some very valuable information about intimate partner violence, sometimes also referred to as domestic violence. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight some of the key points from the Silent Storm video. Intimate partner violence is pervasive. There are some staggering statistics out there. 1 out of every 4 women will be a victim of intimate partner violence in her lifetime. There is a $3 to $4 billion loss each year in lost wages, productivity, and time away from work due to intimate partner violence. And most alarming, intimate partner violence can lead to and result in a catastrophic event. There are signs of intimate partner violence that you can recognize. Abusers may control their victim through force and fear, through their children, money, isolation, denial, and blame. You might notice bruises on a coworker or find it odd that she is wearing off-season clothing. Absenteeism and changes in work patterns are also behaviors of concern. There is a cycle that intimate partner violence follows. It starts with tension building and moves to the occurrence of an abusive incident, followed by a honeymoon phase, where the abuser steps back and may attempt to change the behavior. But then the cycle starts again. A danger zone exists when a victim ends an abusive relationship and moves out. She is most at risk during this time. At that point, the abuser might not know where the victim has moved to, but they know where the victim works. So work becomes where the victim can be found and targeted. This is the most dangerous time for a victim, and when an incident of workplace violence is most likely to occur. How can you respond to intimate partner violence? Recognize, respond, and refer. Number 1, recognize the signs of intimate partner violence. Number 2, respond. Listen, show concern, and be supportive. And number 3, refer the victim for support. If you have a protective order, like a restraining order or a non-contact order in place, provide it to your HR department. They cannot help you if they don't know help is needed. There are various organizations, shelters, and support resources available to victims of intimate partner violence. If you're in an abusive relationship, take advantage of these resources. Talk to your HR or safety department for information of local organizations.
Hi, I'm Joe Trafficani, Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Compliance Officer of United Natural Foods.
And I'm Sandy Black, National Director, Risk and Safety. We would like to make you aware of incidents of workplace violence and help you be prepared should that happen.
You know, workplace violence can find its way into our distribution centers in a number of ways, directly from a troubled associate or indirectly from that associate's domestic partner, let's say, who has issues and finds his or her way into our distribution center. So it's one of these things that we need to be prepared for, and that's exactly what this training is intended to do, prepare us for such an event and help us survive and get through that.
Yeah, it's a vision of workplace violence. We want to help you be aware of potential situations so that you can prevent it from being a bad situation.
And just to give you sort of an idea that this isn't such a foreign concept, it wasn't that long ago that a distribution center near our Dayville, Connecticut distribution center had such a tragedy. An employee there had been disciplined, terminated, and returned to the distribution center and went on a shooting spree, shooting 9 people, killing 8 of them before he turned the gun on himself.
It's awful close to home and definitely points out why we need this training. So we want to make sure that each and every one of you are safe and secure, and that's the purpose of this training, so that we can prevent a tragedy like that from happening at UNFI.
So what we have coming up next is a film, another film that gives you some training if you ever face an active shooter. So pay attention to this thing. It's got some incredible tips, things I hadn't thought of before. And so this is all part of what Sandy and I are calling the proactive preventive training. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shots fired in the workplace. The last sound you'd expect to hear. The odds of being involved in a situation like this are similar to your chances of being struck by lightning. It's a strange thing about lightning, though. We use it as a way to describe something that seemingly has no chance of happening. But how many of us would stand next to a metal pole during a thunderstorm? I'm Randy Spivey.
And I'm Jim Sporleader, both from the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. Even though the possibility of being involved in an active shooter situation is very remote, the consequences are so potentially catastrophic that it makes good sense for you to spend some time thinking and preparing for it. On any given day, chances are lightning will strike someone somewhere. And during any given month or year, the reality is an active shooter will strike somewhere in a workplace. If that somewhere is your workplace, you'll need the proper mindset and the tools necessary to react with purpose and to maximize your chance of survival.
If lightning does strike, if an active shooter enters your workplace, history tells us the incident is often over before any law enforcement or response teams can arrive on scene. Workplace shootings can occur anytime, anywhere, and to anyone. The simple fact is, they happen to folks just like you. And let's be candid, if lightning does strike, if an active shooter enters your workplace, it will be unlike any situation you've ever experienced. And in those initial heart-stopping moments, it will only involve you, your colleagues, and the shooter. The bottom line is, you need to take direct responsibility for your personal safety and security. You must develop a survival mindset.
Survivors are committed to doing whatever it takes. They've taken the time to ask themselves, what would I do if? We call those what-if questions. And they prepare themselves, both mentally and emotionally, to survive the outcome. In other words, they become stakeholders in their own safety and security.
And studies of workplace and also school shootings, we know that many of these incidents are over in a very short period of time, 10, 15 minutes. you often will be the first line of defense in dealing with these particular issues.
Your survival mindset is a protective shield comprised of awareness, preparation, and rehearsal. Awareness involves taking the time necessary to gain a basic understanding of an active shooter situation. Preparation is asking yourself the what-if questions that will enable you to develop effective response strategies. The last component, rehearsal, is practicing your plan.
Shots fired. Do you know what that sounds like? Unless you see the shooter, you may not recognize the sounds for what they are: gunshots. For most of us, our experience with gunshots is drawn from movies and television that use special sound effects. That means real gunshots can sound artificial. You could lose precious seconds as you slowly realize that these are, in fact, life-threatening sounds.
Was that a gunshot?
Well, in many reports of workplace shootings, it's not unusual for individuals to have admitted or said that when they first heard the sounds what appeared to be gunshots, they thought they were something other than that.
You hear some popping noises. Don't be standing there thinking, well, I wonder what that is. Evacuate immediately. Nearest door, nearest window, get out of the building. If it turns out it wasn't shooting, it was a car backfiring or something, big deal.
Long ways out. Were those gunshots?
What should you do in those precious first seconds? You'll need to figure out what's going on and make immediate decisions. How are you going to survive this situation? Will you get out? Is there a path of escape? Will you hide out? Is there a chance to get where the shooter might not find you? Or will you find yourself in a situation where the only option is to try to take out the shooter in whatever way you can?
These are serious decisions. That's why the survival mindset is so important to develop. Research shows that there's a real difference between the reactions of people who've been trained to face stressful, life-threatening situations and those who have not. The first response is the same in both groups, startle and fear. But the reactions between the two begin to differ immediately after that. People who've gone through training, people like you, feel anxious, where the untrained and unprepared begin to feel panic. Trained people begin to recall what they've learned. The untrained fall into disbelief.
I can't believe this is happening.
At this point, the divide between the two starts to get wider. While the untrained people are lost in denial, this can't be happening to me, the trained people are preparing to act just as they've rehearsed.
We have got to get out of here.
Finally, as the untrained descend into helplessness, the trained individual commits to action based on his survival mindset.
A survival mindset enables you to act quickly and effectively. Let's go back to the foundation, awareness. When you get on a plane and the crew asks you to note the nearest exit, they're not trying to create fear. They're certainly not trying to make you afraid to fly. They're just trying to make you aware, providing information so you can develop the survival mindset for that situation. They know if there is an emergency, getting you in a predetermined mindset will help you take rapid, effective actions in a stressful situation. They want you to be mindful, not fearful. If you're mindful, you'll be better able to make that first critical decision. Take a tip from the airlines. Like noting the emergency exits, it may only take a minute or two to look around your work environment and make some mental notes about how you'd handle an active shooter situation.
Look at your work environment through the lens of survival. How will I survive an incident if it happens in my workplace? What should I do? What will I do? What are my possibilities? These are good questions to ask.
You have to realize what the issues may be, ask the what-if questions, and plan your strategy for action should this incident ever occur.
So first, figure out the situation. What's going on? Where's it happening and who's doing it? Build your awareness using all your senses and do it quickly.
Morning, Mark. Can I help you? Mark?
Trust your intuition, your gut feeling. It's a built-in survival mechanism. Some people say it's knowing without knowing why, and it's an invaluable tool. For example, if you hear something that sounds like it might be a gunshot, assume that it is until you know otherwise.
James, that was a gunshot.
Once you figure out what is going on, you'll be better prepared to take action.
If you determine that you can get out to a safer area, then get out and get out fast. Don't wait for others to validate your decision, and leave your belongings behind. The best way to survive an active shooter situation is not to be where he is, and not to go where he can see you. When you get out, immediately call out to let authorities know what's going on. Do not assume someone else is calling.
This is Steve Thomas. I'm at 2214 South Appleway.
Call 911 and be ready to give them useful information. And be persistent, as the phone lines may be jammed with other calls.
I saw at least a pistol and I think some kind of a rifle.
Calmly and quickly tell them where you are and what's happening.
In some cases, you may not be able to get out. The shooter may be between you and the only exit, or perhaps you would have to enter the area or the hallway the shooter is using. It might be safer for you to remain in place because you're well hidden and well protected. In any case, if you can't get out, then you must find a place to hide out. Find a place that will keep you hidden from the shooter's view and will provide some measure of protection should the shooter fire in your direction. If possible, avoid places that might trap you or restrict your options of movement. Once you've found your spot to hide out, you'll want to keep out the shooter. Hiding in a room that can be locked and that has plenty of things to hide behind is best. Blockade the door with heavy furniture, even if the door can be locked. If the shooter is nearby, though, just lock the door and get totally silent. Turn out the lights, turn off any radios or other noises in the room that might alert the shooter to your presence. And don't forget to silence that cell phone or pager if you have one. As soon as you have an opportunity, and without attracting the shooter's attention, call out to 911.
If there are 2 or more of you in the same place, do not huddle together for mutual protection or moral support. Spread out. It's much easier for someone to shoot a group of people who are huddled in one place than who are scattered around the room. Even if you're in a small room, spreading out will give you options and make it harder for the shooter if he does get into your hiding place. When spreading out in a room, quietly talk about what you'll do if the shooter enters. Whichever action you're taking, whether it's get out or hide out and keep out, you should help out where you can. Help others escape as you go. Help prevent others from entering the danger area. If someone near you has a life-threatening injury, if possible, provide first aid and keep them alive. Let others around you know what's happening and try to maintain calm and help them focus on survival. Keep in mind, as events unfold, you must continue to figure out what's happening so you can adjust your actions accordingly.
Unfortunately, you may find yourself in the same room as the shooter, maybe even face to face. You have to assume that his intentions are lethal to you, that his very presence is a very real threat to your life. If a shooter has decided to shoot everyone he comes across, he will probably succeed unless you stop him.
If you can't hide out and you have absolutely no other option, you may have to confront your assailant.
Convince yourself that you have what it takes to survive when your life is on the line. This is a life and death decision only you can make. It's so important to understand that in this kind of situation, anything you do or don't do may involve life-threatening risk. If you determine there's no other option than to take out the shooter, then you must be prepared to do whatever's necessary to neutralize the threat.
Get ready to react. Don't everybody sit on the floor and cower like sheep and let some guy walk around and start killing you.
To do this, you'll need to become more aggressive than you ever thought possible. This means you either disrupt his actions or incapacitate him. Throwing things, yelling, using improvised weapons can all be effective in this situation. But total commitment and absolute resolve are critical.
Hey, it's you or him. So react. If he comes into the room and you got nowhere to go, there's 20 of you, go at him. Take him. Do the best you can.
You're going to have to be as aggressive as you possibly can for as long as it's going to take to once again neutralize that threat and to ensure your safety and security.
If there are 2 or more of you, spread out, make a plan, and act as a team to overcome the shooter. Once again, you and the group will have to make a total commitment to your action and do absolutely whatever it takes without hesitation. To understand this better, think of the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Up until that day, the conventional wisdom about plane hijackings was that you should be calm, non-threatening, and wait for the plane to arrive at the hijacker's destination. Obviously, that guidance did not apply to the hijackings that day. In fact, the passengers of United Flight 93 realized this and used a process like we're describing in this program to figure out what was happening. Once they figured out that the purpose of the hijacking was to kill as many people as possible, the passengers took decisive action to neutralize the threat and prevent further loss of life.
The people that I've spoken to over the years who have survived critical incidents shared that common single-mindedness trait of they were going to make it through this situation no matter what it took. Even if they were physically injured, they weren't going to just throw their hands up and quit. They were going to keep going for as long as they could.
There is another possible resolution to an active shooter situation, and that's when law enforcement arrives and takes action to end the shooting. When officers arrive, be prepared to calmly, quickly, and accurately tell them what they need to know. Location of the shooter, number of the shooters if there's more than one, description of the shooter, and number and kinds of weapons they have.
Where's he at?
He went that way. He went towards the corner.
What's he wearing?
He has long hair. He's wearing a flannel shirt.
Do not expect officers to assist you as you get out.
Okay, stay there, don't move.
Their first job is to stop the shooter and end the bloodshed.
First responders are trained to go where the gunfire is and to really eliminate the threat.
If you're in a room and officers or a SWAT team come in, you must not present a threat to them. Do not point at them or the bad guy. Do not scream or yell. Be quiet and compliant. Do exactly as they say. Remember, they have no way of knowing immediately whether you're one of the good guys.
Show your hands, don't move.
The officers have been taught that hands kill, and they're trained to first look at people's hands. So raise your arms, spread your fingers, and show them your hands as you drop to the floor.
When we make entry into a business, we have an active shooter. We may not know who the active shooter is. We don't know who you are. So if we come into a room, no quick movements, have your hands up in the air, don't have anything in your hands.
They'll know immediately that you're not armed or aggressive. That will help them focus on anyone who is armed and prevent them from mistaking you for one of the bad guys in a very dangerous situation. Remember, they have to begin by assuming everyone is a threat.
Don't make any quick movements towards us at any time. Don't try to hug us, don't try to grab us. You know, we're in this environment to try to find the person who's doing the shooting, so do exactly what we tell you to do and everything will be fine.
It's important for you to realize there are differences between an active shooter and a hostage-taking situation. The hostage-taker wants to use people as leverage to achieve a goal. This is very different than the active shooter, who is there to take lives. If you find yourself in a hostage situation, remain calm, follow directions, and wait for the authorities to resolve the situation.
In most instances, the best course of action for someone finding themselves in that situation is to maintain their composure and be compliant and be patient.
Historically, the vast majority of these situations are resolved through negotiations and they end peacefully. But if the situation changes and someone is actually walking around with a gun shooting people, you're in an active shooter situation. The focus of this program has been on surviving an active shooter situation. However, the most effective way of dealing with this difficult problem is through effective prevention programs. Interestingly, the same survival mindset we've been talking about today can sometimes prevent a situation from becoming violent in the first place. There may be warning signs or pre-incident indicators that something is wrong.
We do see pre-incident indicators. We do see some behaviors that might suggest the possibility of eventual violence. And many of these workplace offenders oftentimes exhibit angry or argumentative behavior. They often blame others for their problems. They fail to take responsibility for their own actions. They're what we would call injustice collectors. They perceive every slight as a major issue that they have to take action upon.
If you're suspicious about something or you really have an uncomfortable feeling, far better to report those types of observations and feelings than to just disregard them and hope that they're going to go away.
Hopefully, your company already has a workplace violence program in place that provides specific guidance on how to maintain a workplace free from threats and violence.
Well, certainly one of the major prevention issues when you look at workplace violence is creating an environment in the workplace where people are treated with dignity and respect.
Take the time to listen to other people. Many times individuals that get involved in violent encounters are individuals that are very frustrated because no one has taken the time from their perception to listen to them.
Remember, it's everyone's responsibility to keep the workplace safe.
Shots fired, a sound you hope to never hear. But if lightning does strike, you'll always have a weapon, a survival mindset. You can survive.
You have just completed the third and final video of UNFI's Workplace Violence Awareness Training. Let's take a moment to review some of the highlights from Shots Fired. Awareness, preparation, rehearsal. These are the steps to take direct responsibility for your personal safety and security. When faced with an active shooting situation, you must be able to react swiftly. Figure out, decide what you are going to do, get out. If you can safely exit the building, then get out. Call out, call 911 if possible. Keep out, stay out of the shooter's path and line of sight. Spread out, do not group with others, find separate hiding areas. And finally, take out. Do what you have to do to survive, including whatever is necessary to overpower the shooter. There are a few key items to remember when law enforcement officers come to your aid. They will not initially know who is the victim or who is the shooter. For safety reasons, they must first assume everyone is in danger. Do not expect them to assist you as you get out. Their focus is the shooter. Keep your hands empty and raised in plain view. Be prepared to calmly, quickly, and accurately provide information and a description of the shooter. Each UNFI location has an emergency action plan which has been given to you during orientation and is reviewed annually. This plan will provide instruction on what to do in the event of a workplace violence incident. If you have any questions about your facility's plan, ask your supervisor. Just 3 easy words: awareness, preparation, rehearsal. So simple and yet so powerful. 3 steps that can save your life.
Hello, my name is Sean Griffin. I'm the Senior Vice President of Distribution at UNFI. First of all, I want to thank everyone for your attention today. Realize how busy your schedules are, but this is very important material, and I certainly appreciate you spending the time to listen and learn about workplace violence. You know, I'm the guy that usually you see in the distribution centers as I've traveled across the US and Canada, that's talking about productivity and efficiencies, about customer service and fill rates. Equally important is assuring a safe workplace for UNFI, because we would all agree that without a safe workplace, none of the other important issues can be realized. Flashpoint taught us how to recognize destructive behaviors that can spill over to the workplace and how to take proactive measures safely to avoid these behaviors. Silent Storm showed us how domestic violence and abuse can spill over to a UNFI workplace and how destructive that behavior can be. And finally, Shots Fired took us through an active shooting event. We read the newspapers and we watch the news. And we know that across the United States, in businesses and in homes, violence of this nature is a commonplace. Remember, UNFI has the resources and the tools to help. Your first opportunity is your local HR team. And of course, your corporate legal team and UNFI's Ethic Hotline. We know that UNFI is a safe workplace, and we want to keep it that way. And we need your help to do that. So we call on you to spend the time to think about what you've learned today, to go through these various scenarios, and assure yourselves and assure the associates around you that you'll be prepared to act. We appreciate that very much. Thank you for your attention.